Hello guys, thank you so much for coming back to watch another video on my channel. Capcom has been very successful with making remakes for the old Resident Evil titles, which we played ages ago, and we now get to see them in a remake format. For example, Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is one of my favorite games of all time, Resident Evil 4 Remake. So we know there's going to be more Resident Evil remakes come out from Capcom, and they're going to be making them along with the main number titles. However, which Resident Evil title has the chance or has the potential to get the same remake treatment from Capcom? So let's find out together. Now before I start the video, as I do cover quite a lot of games, different genres but mostly horror games, so if you do like that sort of content and you do like this video, do make sure to stick around and subscribe to my channel, and it will allow me to make more of these videos for you guys. The first one I think is a dead giveaway. It will be the Resident Evil 5 Remake. Resident Evil 5 Remake has the potential and has the chance to get the same treatment as what they did with the Resident Evil 4 Remake. Now the character model of Albert Wesker is already there. People are already introduced to it now, and people have been teased at the end of the game that where Albert Wesker is talking about releasing this virus to cost billions of human lives, and that's where Ada turns around and doesn't give him the virus. So it makes it alluded that Albert Wesker is planning something big, and people who never played any Resident Evil titles are looking forward to seeing that, and I think this would be the perfect chance for them to do the right justice to Resident Evil 5, because Resident Evil 5 as a game, I personally really enjoyed it. It featured one of my favorite protagonists in the game, Chris Redfield, and you have the co-op element which you can use now with the modern technology on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. And the same goes for Chris Redfield, which has also been introduced in Resident Evil Village. So a lot of gamers out there who's played even recent Resident Evil titles, they can tell who Chris Redfield is and Albert Wesker is. So I think that would make a lot of sense for them to go back and make and remake this game properly with the proper survival horror elements, rather than focusing far too much on action, and add new features in the game which can elevate this game and could make it also one of the best remakes from Capcom. Now going back to the co-op element in Resident Evil 5, I think it's a feature which would help Capcom quite a lot, because they tried to do a co-op element or online multiplayer Resident Evil title and they never have been successful for them. I think doing with the Resident Evil 5 remake, which give them a more safer route, and it would allow more players to get engaged with the game. So I think it would help them with the purchases of the Resident Evil titles, and it would allow people who'd never played Resident Evil 5 due to reviews or due to personal reasons now can get into it with the Resident Evil 5 remake, as long as they'd done it correctly. Resident Evil 5 was also one of the highest selling games from, let's say, the Xbox 360 era, so I think this would be perfect for them to do the game again. It has a lot of potential, and I think Capcom would like to rely on that and elevate the game from what it was and introduce us to the modern gamers. Resident Evil 0. I think this game had a lot of potential to be a great Resident Evil title, but the problem was that it tried too much to beat Resident Evil 1 Remake, which didn't do much to this game, because Resident Evil 1 Remake was a perfect remake for Resident Evil 1 title. It added so many features, so many elements to the game, whereas Resident Evil 0 Remake kind of goes back slightly and introduces the same elements, but making it far more worse for the series and for the fans, that it didn't become as popular hit as Resident Evil 1 was. It has one of the worst backtracking in any Resident Evil title. You don't have much of these save boxes or item boxes where you can't put, you have to literally drop the items, then you get stuck with a dual puzzle mechanics, and they tried to use new features, but it just did not work, and it felt too much and too slow compared to Resident Evil 1 Remake, where the game nailed the backtracking element compared to Resident Evil 0 Remake. However, looking from the outside, this game had a lot of potential, could have been one of the greatest games ever, and they could still do that through a remake, because it has a lot of backstory behind the Bravo team which comes to the Spencer Mansion, and I think they can introduce us to what happened with this team and what happened to Rebecca Chambers, and you can introduce us to the virus, to the people who never played any Resident Evil titles, that this was a point where everything started and how it went to Spencer Mansion and it fell from there to Raccoon City and it spread further, and that's how you can do the justice with the Resident Evil 0 remake. You can also do a lot of puzzles with the mansion because the mansion is there. You can expand it, do the same puzzle mechanics which you did with the Resident Evil 2 remake, and you can expand on the backstory, add a lot more stuff in which can introduce us to, let's say, Resident Evil Village, and you can connect it with Resident Evil 1, and that could be the point where they can do that through Resident Evil 0 remake. Also, Resident Evil 0 has a lot of animal zombies compared to, let's say, humanoid zombies, and I think this would allow them to maybe test it and see if Resident Evil 0 remake turn out to be really massive success for them. Then they can actually do a Dino Crisis remake, which I think a lot of fans been waiting for a long time. Resident Evil Outbreak, it is a very underrated title. Capcom never paid any attention, never made any Outbreak titles from that point, because it features a story around the same time when all the Raccoon City event was happening. Now, Resident Evil Outbreak had one of those features at the PS2 era that you can play with your friends, and it had a lot of different characters you can play. You can do that with Resident Evil Outbreak remake and add these features as, let's say, a multiplayer, an online game which has a really good story, or maybe have 4-player, and it would allow a lot of gamers to come back and play with the group of friends, and it could become a popular owned title compared to, let's say, the Resident Evil remakes you're doing in a more traditional format, or a Resident Evil, numbered title. This could be its own spin-off while keeping the same core elements of Resident Evil titles. Now, there's also potential that you can actually get to explore more of Raccoon City, especially RPD Station, which is one of my favourite locations from Resident Evil 2 remake. So I think if they can expand on it, do a bit more backstory, I think it would attract a lot of players who already played Resident Evil 2 remake, 3 remake, and they can get into Resident Evil Outbreak because of those locations and how much people love them. And we will be able to see how people survived and how a lot of survivors were put in the place before everything went to disaster. The Resident Evil Code Veronica remake, this is something I've been waiting and a lot of fans been waiting for a long time. This is also another underrated Resident Evil title. It plays very similar to Resident Evil 2 and 3, and if you never gave it a chance, let's say, and if you love all the original Resident Evil titles, you would love Code Veronica. And if they'd done a remake for this one, you could get to play Chris Redfield again, Claire Redfield after the events of Resident Evil 2, and you would also get to see Albert Wesker again. You can do the same puzzle mechanics, you can do the backtracking, which we now known from Resident Evil 2 remake, and this game could elevate and could be very successful remake for them, for Capcom to do it. And I think a lot of fans have been asking, they've done a survey, they asked a lot of fans if they're looking forward to it, and a lot of fans been looking forward for Code Veronica. So I think it would allow a lot of new fans, or even the old fans who never get a chance to play it, by having this remake, they can get introduced to this game. And I think Capcom knows how much fans have been asking for this game for a long period of time. And personally, I think this game has a lot more chance of getting a remake treatment, as how much it has been requested by fans from Capcom for a long period of time. And while now they're already working on these remake titles, I think they would go back to Code Veronica and do a proper remake treatment, and it could potentially be the next remake from Capcom. And lastly, Resident Evil 1 remake. It's already been done in a remake in 2002 when it came out in GameCube, and that game literally is one of the best games ever, one of the perfect Resident Evil titles. And to be honest, if you go back, and I still play that game and I've finished that game about 20 times already, it's one of my favourite games of all time. But I think to a modern audience, how they used to more survival horror games right now, with the gameplay mechanics of Alan Wake, or let's say Resident Evil 4 remake, I think if it gets the same sort of treatment, this game would be mind-blowing for a lot of gamers out there. Resident Evil 1 has one of the best soundtracks, best location, one of the best survival horror mechanics. It goes back to the basics, and you can do that with a remake, which a lot of gamers who've never got hold to any Resident Evil original titles, they get to see how this Resident Evil franchise has evolved from this game, and this was the first game to introduce us to this survival horror mechanics. So doing this game a remake would be a justice for the Resident Evil franchise, because we already got a Resident Evil 2 remake and 3 remake, so it makes sense to do a Resident Evil 1 remake. You have Chris Redfield, you have Jill Valentine, the main protagonist of this franchise, you have Albert Wesker, and you can get to explore the original story about the Resident Evil 1, and you can do more things which you have introduced to the more modern remakes with the Resident Evil titles. These are the things which I love to play in Resident Evil games, so I think doing this remake would bump up a lot of sales for Capcom anyway. So what do you guys think? Which game has the potential of getting the next remake treatment, which could be the next remake already in the making at Capcom? So please do let me know in the comment section down below in this video. So I'll catch you guys again with another video on my channel. Until then, look after yourself. Have a good one.